Tonight on Newsnight Scotland, what is housing for? Prices here are showing some signs of recovery, but while that may be good for homeowners, is it good for the wider economy? And we look at the row over who's behind Labour for independence and ask whether Labour's heartland support could be persuaded to vote yes. Good evening. If you're a homeowner from East Renfrewshire, well, congratulations. The value of your property has increased by more than 6% in a year, and you didn't need to raise a finger to make it happen. And house prices could be lifted further by a new government scheme to guarantee mortgages. There's only one problem. Wasn't it housing debt that crashed the economy in the first place? Here's Andrew Black.
House prices have long been used as a measure of how well the economy is doing, and going by the latest information, it seems things may be looking positive. According to figures from Registers of Scotland, the total proportion of Scottish house sales increased by just over 8% between April and June this year. Over the same period, the average house price fell slightly by 0.3% to stand at just over £153,000. In more affluent areas like East Renfrewshire, the average going rate for a house is well above what it is nationally. Average on the market prices for properties in this area have now breached the £200,000 mark. So what can we take from the figures?
The recent figures show, as they have for the last 9 months, that the volume of sales in Scotland has increased by over 8%, and indeed the value has increased as well by over 7%. The average house price has reduced very slightly across Scotland, but this is a trend that we've seen over the last 9 months, which is encouraging.
Encouraging is certainly one way to look at it, but it's also argued that an upturn in the market doesn't always equate to a good news story.
It's really depressing that so many policymakers seem determined to learn no lessons whatsoever from the crisis that first hit in 2007. Housing transactions might be beginning to rise, prices might be stagnant at this moment in time, but the fact is that housing supply, which is what we should be really concerned about at this moment in time, is not showing any signs of rising at all. Indeed, all the policy that's coming forward from a UK level at this moment in time seems designed to increase prices and do nothing whatsoever about supply. This is the opposite of what needs to be happening at this time.
Nevertheless, governments do drive aspirations for people in this country to own homes, like the Chancellor's current scheme to help people onto the property ladder through equity loans. But do these types of policies help the economy?
Rising house prices, which on the face of it seem to be good for existing homeowners, are simply pricing out the next generation of homeowners, and often their own children or grandchildren are the ones who are going to suffer from that. So you have got to ask, is this really worthwhile doing? We did some research a couple of years ago which suggested it's actually quite hard to find evidence that either from a macroeconomic point of view or from a microeconomic point of view, that rising home ownership actually helps the economy in the longer term. So you've got to really wonder if this is really worthwhile. Politically, it's extremely difficult to change the cultural domination of home ownership. But if you look at countries like Germany or France or Switzerland, they don't have the same home ownership rates that countries like the UK have, but their economies seem to be certainly very strong.
So how does policy need to change?
Many economists have argued for many years, the Inquiry into British Housing, Joseph Rowntree Foundation and others have argued for a restructuring of housing taxation to make housing more like other assets, so that when people are thinking about saving and investing, they view housing like any other asset, rather than putting all their eggs in one basket, as many people do.
That may be a laudable aim, but the experts also warn it won't happen overnight. And of course, as the latest figures show, there's no shortage of people wanting to buy homes.
Well, I'm joined now by Andy Kerr, who was until 2007 the Labour Finance Minister in what we knew then as the Scottish Executive. Also here is Joe Armstrong of the Centre for Public Policy for the Regions. Well, first of all, Joe Armstrong, this equity loan scheme that Andrew was referring to, no one seems to have much of a problem with that because it's specifically for new build houses. But there's another one about to come in, isn't there? A mortgage guarantee scheme.
Yes.
Is that a good idea?
The issue is whether or not having higher house prices gives people some sort of good feel factor that then makes them go out and spend money. And I think probably part of the reason for having it is
but just specifically on the mortgage guarantee scheme, I know one of the criticisms of it is that all it's going to do, because it guarantees a section of people's mortgages, is encourage people to go one rung up the ladder more than they can afford.
Well, some house builders would argue that in order for them to be able to sell their new start properties, they've got to have movement in the market up the ladder. So part of it will help first-time buyers getting in, and therefore help the construction sector and help some parts of the sector.
So it will have a good effect in that sense?
It will have some effect, but I think probably most commentators would argue that the scheme that's coming in January has a higher probability of inflating prices rather than actually helping the economy.
And presumably when it stops could depress prices?
Well, I suppose the idea might be that at that point the economy is on the up, we're starting to see wages rising faster than inflation, and that itself will then fill the gap. Right,
now your bigger point that you were starting to make is that do we just think about, have we got a wrong attitude to housing?
We've certainly taken on home ownership with gusto in the last 30 years. We've now got about 60–70% with home ownership. And I said, you probably feel the same as I feel. If your house prices are rising, there's a wealth effect, and you start to feel wealthier than would otherwise be the case. People have been using that wealth effect to actually release funds to buy household goods. That itself also helps the retail sector.
But when the film talked about changing the structure, I mean, the main thing is the fact you don't have to pay capital gains tax on any increase in the value of your house, isn't it? That's the big one.
Correct. You don't.
So people aren't being irrational when they do this.
It's not the same. Yes, it's definitely the taxation regime for housing is different to other, as your package says, other asset classes.
And that's a problem, isn't it, Andy Kerr? Because as an ex-politician, or temporarily ex-politician, former politician, I mean, it's almost impossible for any politician of any party in Britain to say, look, we want, as the professor was arguing there, to be more like Germany, so we're going to charge you capital gains tax on any increase in the value of your house.
I think we forget that government makes many decisions in society which are rigging markets, energy, where you build your motorway, what incentives you give to business to relocate. So this is just another vehicle by which you can use, I think quite accurately, a mechanism by which you can stimulate economic growth by the building of more houses, and I think that's a good thing. I think
the equity loan scheme was that. What I'm saying is that the refusal to charge tax on capital gains on housing. Can you imagine? I mean, when you were a politician, if you even whispered such a thing, you could pretty much guarantee, at a UK level or at a Scottish level, you would lose the election.
And a big outcry. Well, tough decisions have to be made. I think that's part of the problem we have. We're not building enough social housing in Scotland. We're not balancing the whole housing sector, and we've got real problems of demand. So I think there's a place for measures which create demand for private housing, get that economic turnover moving.
But do you think there is an argument for this bigger restructuring which the professor was talking about?
Actually, I don't. But I mean, I would need to look into it more fully. But I don't see that. I think you can, as long as we don't forget the mistakes of the past around the easy access to mortgages which we had. You can, if you prove you earn that much, you can get 7 times that.
It'll be a lot easier come January.
No, I don't think it will be. I think there's still mechanisms behind that around people's ability to pay back. It ain't going to be as bad, and it won't be as bad as the 7 times your annual salaries we had before.
It's not just the big issue of restructuring the housing market, is it? There's an even bigger issue behind this. I mean, some economists now are saying that, OK, we've got a little bit of economic growth back, but it's the wrong kind of economic growth. And the danger we have is where we need an economy that rebalances towards making things, and particularly exporting them. What we're going to get is an economy which, once again, is consumers will spend more because the values of the houses are going up and they feel a bit richer and they go and spend things in the shop, and that's not what we need.
Yes, and I do think we need a rebalancing to some extent, or we need to think about the restructuring of the sector at the moment, because if we've got jobs that are not where the houses are, then not having affordable housing or having your assets tied up in a very illiquid asset means you're actually going to make the labour market less flexible, and that in itself actually will keep dampen the
that is becoming, isn't it, Andy Kerr, a big problem. I mean, in a very odd way, this financial crisis, which you might think would have affected London more, is accelerating the gap between London and the rest of the UK. I mean, house prices fell here, as we heard, have been falling here. I mean, house prices went up 13% in London over the last year, and that makes it ever more difficult for people from Scotland or the regions of England to think about moving there.
But if we are, Scotland's a small place. If we're more precise about our interventions we make, more precision, not blanket measures, then I believe you can try and avoid some of the correct points that Joe makes about fixing an asset in the wrong place becomes liquid and people can't move around for work. But we know we've got shortage of social housing, we've got demand for that. We need a ray of hope for some of those young kids who need into housing, but we also need to provide access to mortgages in a stable fashion, but allows folk to get on that rung. And it creates the economic multiplier.
What about this? It's not just the London effect, it's the fact that the southeast of England it accelerates this pulling away, doesn't it?
Well, you know, the London metropolis, if you like, or the kind of city-state that's down there, we are benefiting from some of the effects from that. So I think we ignore that at our peril, or we damage
I was thinking
that
more
at
of
our peril.
labour mobility.
But labour mobility issues are absolutely fundamental. If we want to get people benefiting from the London effect, then they've got to be able to find a property down there. That's where the private rented sector comes in, and I think there's big issues around how do we make that an attractive option, not a second-best option to home ownership.
All right, Luke, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you both very much indeed. Now, who are Labour for Independence? A genuine movement of Labour activists who vote yes next year and want to persuade other Labour supporters to do likewise, or a nationalist front sowing confusion behind enemy lines? A flurry of articles this week seem to suggest the group is not what it seems. It was this article on the right of centre website Think Scotland which started the furore. The Scotland on Sunday columnist Ewan McComb identifies several of the campaigners in the picture as SNP activists, including the SNP leader on East Ayrshire Council. At the end of the piece, he accuses Labour for Independence of being a sham, a tawdry little con in which some of the party's most bitter rivals are complicit. Since then, the campaign director of Better Together, Blair McDougall, has tweeted this picture, identifying 3 of the 4 men in it as SNP Midlothian councillors.
I don't know if you can see the changes that have come over me.
Viewers with long memories may recall that we accompanied the leader of Labour for Independence, Alan Grogan, to last year's pro-independence rally in Edinburgh, and we asked him then if the organisation is really what it seems.
Are you an SNP double agent? Are you a Labour person spying on the SNP, or are you really what you say you are?
It's amazing amount of times I've heard this SNP thing. No, I'm a Labour Party member. I've been a Labour Party member for the better part of the last 10 years. I've supported Labour all my life. But I fundamentally disagree with the policy of the Better Together campaign. I believe in Scotland would be better as an independent country, and we're here in support of that.
Mr Grogan hasn't denied that the people in the pictures are SNP members. He says Labour for Independence campaigns with other Yes Scotland supporters. He says they currently have between 80 and 100 people signed up, of whom around half are Labour Party members. Those are pretty small numbers, but why shouldn't Labour for Independence exist? A recent poll from Ipsos Mori suggests that around 13% of Labour voters plan to vote yes. The question is whether this is more than a fringe group whose numbers have been swelled by SNP members in an attempt to exaggerate its influence. Well, in our Dundee studios, Alan Grogan, who set up Labour for Independence, and Michael Kelly, long-standing Labour politician and activist, joins me in the studio. Well, Alan Grogan, how long have you actually been a member of the Labour Party?
I was a member of the Labour Party from when I was about 18, 19 years of age until I left the country in 2007 to go abroad. I then returned in 2010 and rejoined about a week later, and I've been a member since then as well.
So you've been a member since 2010, which is not really quite the best part.
I've been a member, since 2003 with, 4 or 5 years now.
Have you had time to go and check how many Labour Party members you actually have in your organisation?
We've our membership is still actually being accounted for after a successful policy conference and some publicity this week, and it's been a growing number, but we estimate it to be about 40% of Labour Party members are members of Labour for Independence.
Sorry, 40% of your membership are Labour Party members. You don't have 40... Right, OK. And how many members do you have?
Like you said in the video, we have about 80 to 100, I would estimate, yeah.
Right, so that's about, what, 30-odd members of the Labour Party?
Which, we've made no bones about the fact that we're a growing organisation. with little media coverage until perhaps this weekend, we have been growing as a small political organisation, and we make no bones about that.
But if even according to your own account, a majority of your members are not in fact members of the Labour Party, why do you try to pass yourself off as a Labour Party organisation?
We work within the Labour Party and within Yes Scotland. We don't try and pass ourselves off as being within anything. What I would say is, what's been spoken about this weekend or this week, there's been a lot of talk about Labour membership. At the best estimate, the Labour membership is probably about 13,000, and in the last Scottish elections, 600,000 people voted for Labour. So you're talking about 2% of their vote is, or the Labour leadership's, what they're looking at's vote is Labour Party members.
Well, Michael Kelly, I think you describe yourself now as if Andy Kerr was a former politician, you're an ex-former politician.
Exactly. I'm
what do you
Scotsman columnist.
What do you make of this organisation?
I think that if this was a commercial organisation, it would be prosecuted under the Trade Description Act. By the very figures that Alan has given us tonight, this is not Labour for independence. This is disgruntled people who, with Labour sympathies, voting for independence. So he should change the title immediately. It's certainly not, as he claims, working within the Labour Party. It's working out with the Labour Party against Labour Party policies.
Well, what should the Labour Party do about it? It could
ignore it. Ignore it.
Well, I mean, it could make it a prescribed organisation like they did with the military.
No, it's not worth doing that. I mean, we're talking about 80 people here. I mean, it's astonishing that an organisation that small can't give us a precise figure. I mean, surely it should be 89, 92 or whatever. There's a vagueness about it here. The fact that these photographs that are authenticated here show not Labour Party members but SNP members suggests that this is just something dreamt up by Alan possibly. I don't necessarily know if the SNP are behind it in the sense of making it a front organisation like that, but it is fronting and it is actively helped, not by Labour members but by the
let's
SNP.
give him a chance. Alan Grogan, what do you say to this business about the pictures? I mean, I take the point you've made that obviously if you go on, say, a Yes campaign demonstration, other people who are not part of your organisation might jolly around with you. But having SNP councillors enthusiastically hoisting your Labour banners does rather seem to imply that, that perhaps they've got more sympathy for you than the Labour Party does.
Well, can I just say that the picture you've shown about the SNP councillors, we have never put that on our website, we've never promoted that on our Facebook. I was unaware of the picture in the first place. We work with Yes Scotland and we make no bones about working with other political organisations and political parties, and one of them is, of course, working alongside the SNP. But for Michael to say there that it's not a Labour movement at all, it's absolutely ridiculous. There seems to be an obsession about Labour members when, as I said, you're talking about a small minority, and what's actually the case is you're seeing
uses Labour Party colours, Labour Party logos, Labour Party typeface on his banners, when it's nothing whatsoever to do.
Okay.
So this is a deception.
All right, hang on. What about the broader issue, Michael Kelly? If 13% of Labour voters say they'd vote for independence, is Alan Grogan on for something, irrespective of the arguments about what he's doing right now with this specific organisation? Is he actually on for something? The Yes campaign should be targeting Labour Party members and supporters because they might find it fertile ground.
Oh, I think that the SNP have to target Labour voters because they simply won't win without them. And to the argument that will some people who vote Labour vote for independence, yes, clearly they will. I mean, if the package that we're being offered includes Dennis Canavan's Republic abolishing the Queen, then many left-wing voters would vote for that package. But that will be completely counterbalanced by the number of people who voted SNP in Holyrood elections who will vote against independence.
All right, OK. So he might be onto something.
No, I don't think he's on to anything at all. I think it's a desperate ploy to try and sustain a staggeringly bad campaign.
Just as a matter of curiosity, Alan Grogan, are there any specifically Labour policies that you would like to see either adopted by the Yes campaign or put forward in an independent Scotland?
Well, we believe that the best thing for the Labour Party, as well as the best thing for the people of Scotland, would be independence, because it would see us moving away from the ties of Westminster and returning to what a real Labour Party would be, based on the founding principles of
So you can't actually cite any Labour policies which you prefer to SNP policies?
No, of course we can. We've at our policy conference this weekend, we already discussed NATO. We talked about the bedroom tax and how we feel that the SNP government should be using the the remainings of the budget from last year to maybe impact on that and help people at the moment without waiting until there's a referendum on it. But
Right.
something interesting Michael said, I just want to make a point.
Well, you
He
still
made a
haven't
point about
cited
the
any
SN
Labour policies that
Sorry.
you prefer to SNP ones.
Yes, I mean, the founding principles of Labour policies are absolutely true. Our free education, universal healthcare, credit for, from cradle to grave. We're looking at using the common wheel, which is a very exciting new venture. But just to pick up, as I was about to say on the point that Michael made, he continually says the SNP, and this is the whole point of this. This is the tribalism of Scottish politics, which the leadership of the Labour Party are trying to infuse in this. One of the good things about Yes Scotland is we are a cross-party movement, and we're proud to be...
Still mystified about these Labour
tribalism.
policies, but there we are. All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you.
Quickly at tomorrow's front pages. The Scotsman, it's got a picture there of this 2 dead chemical incident at City Centre Hotel. This is in Edinburgh. Plan to teach Gaelic and every primary, it says. Couple and cyanide, again, the Edinburgh Hotel thing in the Daily Mail. That's all we have time for this week. We'll be back next week. Good night.